When Prince Charles ascends to the throne, Queen Elizabeth says she wants Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, to be referred to as Queen Consort. 17 claims that Charles's wife is known as Queen Camilla. Within the peaceful confines of her beloved Raymill retreat, rather than the opulence of Buckingham Palace, Queen Camilla's life was rocked. What started out as a private moment quickly turned into a storm that was too big for any royal guard to control. History weighed more heavily than ever on the monarchy's brittle image. Whispers became headlines, and allegiance became distrust. Could this be the saddest part of her queen consort journey to date? You will be astounded by what comes next. So stay with us. A queen under close observation, Camilla's accession to the throne was not the idealized ascent that many people had in mind for a queen. It was a tale tinged with historical wounds, a crown worn not in celebration, but in the shadow of controversy. She had been known for decades as the other woman, the person who was held responsible for Diana, Princess of Wales's misery. Cartoons depicted her as an intruder who had taken something that was never hers, newspapers mocked her, and television pundits analyzed every action she took. Even when the crown was ultimately placed on her head, that reputation clung to her like smoke and was impossible to completely shake. Although her 2023 coronation may have appeared to be a triumph, Camilla saw it more as an uncomfortable truth. She had gained legitimacy in the eyes of tradition, thanks to Queen Elizabeth II's approval. However, love and legality are not the same thing. History documented her as queen consort, and large crowds attended the magnificent rituals. However, there was hesitancy in the public's silent looks. Supporting her frequently sounded more like courtesy than sincere admiration, and the truth that words could not conceal was captured on camera when she stood next to Charles. Although she was never completely accepted, she was tolerated. Why? Even during the height of her rule, did suspicions still exist? Part of the solution is found in Diana's lasting recollection. Time never diminished her reputation. For many, Catherine, Princess of Wales, who was elegant, kind, and beloved, was Diana's mirror image. Camilla, on the other hand, seemed more rigid and icy, her charm unable to evoke the same affection. She would never be able to escape the parallel, which served as a reminder that while crowns might be inherited, affection must be earned. The monarchy is based on impression rather than wealth or jewels. Additionally, Camilla's biggest enemy was perception. Every wave and grin appeared deliberate, as though she was aware of how delicate the crown she wore was. But if her subjects never really recognized her as their own, could a queen live? This is just the beginning. So stay with us. For the majority of individuals, a rural getaway is just a place to relax and escape the stress of everyday life. That location was Raymill House, a vast estate in Wiltshire that Queen Camilla had acquired in the 1990s, years before she wed Charles. For her, it was more than just a house. It was a haven where she could escape the rigidity of royal protocol, encircled by the comforts of her own choosing, rather than by courtiers or cameras. Instead of being the queen consort, she may live here as Camilla Parker Bowles. Critics, however, saw Raymill as something very else. Raymill was hidden from the institution's view, unlike Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, and this concealment stoked mistrust. Why, after experiencing the splendor of royal life, did she hold on to it so tightly? Why pick the countryside over historic palaces? Many thought she was upholding a parallel reality, with one foot firmly outside the monarchy and the other inside. Whispers accumulated like storm clouds throughout the years. There were rumors of secret dinners that were hosted there long after she married Charles, with politicians subtly inviting powerful people without anyone noticing. Detractors saw these as warning signs, while proponents saw them as harmless social events. Was Raymill being used for something far more complex, or was this just a queen looking for familiarity and comfort? It was impossible to overlook the symbolism. Palaces stand for tradition, continuity, and the crown's prominence. Raymill stood for remoteness, mystery, and the potential for shadows that are hidden from the general public. Camilla's decision to spend a weekend there, rather than at Windsor each time, sent a message that was more powerful than words. Her loyalties felt most secure here. The discrepancy then grew more pronounced throughout the years, becoming inevitable. Catherine's visits to government buildings, her interactions with kids in school corridors, and her giggles with hospital personnel went viral. In the meantime, Camilla's choice for Raymill created a detached image of a monarch withdrawing from her subjects. The estate no longer appeared to be a safe haven, it started to appear to the general public as a secret vault where the hidden dramas of the monarchy may play out. Could such weight be carried by a single house? Could peaceful gardens and stone walls serve as a backdrop for rumors that could topple a crown? As things turned out, the response was much more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. Keep your eyes open. You'll want to know what came to light next. The brittle numerals of the crown. Despite wars, revolutions, and the changing course of history, the monarchy has endured for centuries as a symbol of continuity. Tradition, not popularity, was always cited as its strength. However, flaws in that belief started to appear by the middle of the 1920s. Numbers were more important than ever in the era of social media, televised performances, and never-ending surveys. While Catherine, Princess of Wales, earned approval ratings that reached above 70, and occasionally even 80%, Queen Camilla felt no protection in such statistics. Often dipping lower, Camilla's stubbornly hovered in the low 30s. These weren't only figures, they were signals. In Britain, verdicts were given in living rooms rather than courtrooms. Despite all of its customs and crowns, the monarchy now depended on popular support to endure. The institution ran the risk of becoming irrelevant without it. There was no greater ruthless contrast between Catherine and Camilla. Every time Catherine appeared in public, it went viral. At a children's charity, a picture of her squatting to talk to toddlers won hearts all around the world. Networks showed a video of her holding a distraught mother, which was presented as evidence of her warmth and relatability. People saw Diana's legacy revived in those pictures, a well-known elegance that gave them confidence that the crown's future was safe. Camilla's appearances, however, frequently sent a different message. She was photographed standing awkwardly at public occasions, holding a glass at formal lunches, and seeming stiff and unsmiling. The visuals were brutal. One woman seemed lively and organic, the other was confined and far away. The gulf was evident side by side. Additionally, Camilla's position appeared to be more of a liability than a victory, with each poll that increased the distance. With every month that went by, the tension inside the palace increased. Charles was subtly alerted by advisors that the public's tolerance was ebbing. Ever loyal to duty, Princess Anne expressed her worries directly. Additionally, Prince William, who was already leery of Camilla's increasing power, started to wonder how long the monarchy could withstand such disparaging remarks. What future did Camilla have if the people had already selected their queen in spirit, and it wasn't the woman who was crowned next to Charles? The battleground for a monarchy founded on formality was now perception. Grand processions and glittering gems were no longer enough to protect the royal family from the statistical verdict. It became brutally evident in a 2024 survey. Catherine was chosen by 58% of the public as the person who best embodied the future of the monarchy. Camilla was only selected by. These kinds of numbers weren't just whims. Legacies were decided by these seismic upheavals. When the court of public opinion had already rendered its decision, could tradition stand on its own? Given that the majority of the country had already moved on to someone else, could Camilla really represent the throne? They no longer muttered these questions in corners, they reverberated inside royal walls as well as in headlines and commentary. The crown no longer felt safe on Camilla's head. It was as brittle as glass, and the balance shifted even further with each new poll and photo comparison. Was the monarchy then adjusting to the modern era, or did the sheer weight of the multitudes threaten to rip it apart? Keep an eye out, since crowns can be overthrown by numbers. Whispers at the palace walls. Life may seem planned, calm, and even eternal inside the glittering gates of Buckingham Palace and the reverberating halls of Windsor. However, people closest to the Queen Consort started to pick up on little things that weren't part of the royal script. They initially appeared to be innocuous oddities. Camilla asking probing questions about policy, holding thoughtfully planned meals at Ray Mill, or seeking briefings that are often only given to the sovereign. However, when combined, these pieces depicted a consort taking on a position she was never intended to play. Employees who had worked for royals for generations murmured about hazy borders, notes from meetings Charles had attended alone, briefings on confidential government deliberations, descriptions of parliamentary debates, and Camilla's strange requests were all recalled by one person wrote it off as curiosity, while another gave a different explanation. She is more curious than a consort ought to be. Later, the remark, which was dismissed at the time, became prescient. Her impact went beyond briefing notes and papers. At Ray Mill, Visitors weren't necessarily relatives or friends. There were rumors of private meetings with cultural leaders, powerful benefactors, and politicians. They may have seemed like social dinners to the general public, but they smelled of quiet lobbying to those inside the palace gate. Was Camilla just establishing connections? Or was she creating a rival network of power to that of the king? There was more to the rumors. Loyalty changed around her. As palace insiders saw, previously devoted only to Charles, courtiers started spending more time fulfilling Camilla's request. Subtle loyalty tests were described by the staff, who quickly sent her messages, who discreetly passed information, who was hesitant. Aides described worried looks in the hallways. When her name came up, the conversation sank to whisper. For some it was palace life as usual, but with a veneer of secrecy and etiquette. Others perceived it as growing fault lines beneath the crown. The familial dynamic made everything more difficult. With a strong sense of duty, Princess Anne expressed her discomfort. William, who was calm in public but cautious in private, became less friendly with Camilla. Any sense of Camilla's overreach was acute and stinging since Diana's ghost was still around. Even Catherine's quiet demeanor and increasing prominence in the public eye made Camilla's mistakes feel more serious, and every rumor more perilous. What started off as sporadic staff whispers started to crystallize into something more difficult to ignore. Unusual meetings were noted in memos that surreptitiously circulated. Advisors maintained records on their observations and remarks. In isolation, none of it was scandalous. However, taken as a whole, it resembled a dossier being constructed in real time, one that has the potential to destroy the monarchy's core sense of harmony. Were these rumors just palace intrigue that would eventually die out like so many rumors before them? Or were they the first fissures in a foundation that was already being undermined by public skepticism? Insiders questioned how long it would take until rumors turned into allegations, as the distinction between loyalty and treachery became increasingly blurred. From this point on, the clash that no one anticipated only gets more intense. Tensions simmered beneath the surface of royal life for weeks. People continued to appear in public as if nothing had changed. William maintained a calm but detached demeanor. Catherine dazzled onlookers with her kindness, while Camilla grinned rigidly next to Charles. Behind closed doors, however, the atmosphere had become tense and once restricted to staff hallways, whispers had now reached the royals themselves, making them face the question that no one dared to ask out loud. Was Camilla going beyond what a consort ought to never do? Princess Anne was For decades she had endured the storms of gossip, known for her candor and commitment to duty. However, Camilla's growing desire for power and the disclosures of private meetings at Ramil were too much for her to keep quiet about. She made her warning without hesitation. In a private meeting with Charles, she allegedly told him that he did not possess the crown. She is causing harm to something that belongs to the people. Calm but scathing, her words struck like iron. The message was nearly intolerable to Charles, who had dedicated his life to protecting Camilla. But Anne wasn't by herself. Despite his more circumspect speech, William let his deeds speak louder than his words. During family get-togethers, his posture became more aloof. His conversations with Camilla were terse and aloof. His annoyance erupted behind the scenes when he heard that she was pushing for her kids to play bigger roles. This aim was not innocuous to him. He could never accept the rewriting of history, which was an affront to Diana's memory. Insiders claimed that his rage was evident when he faced Charles. He saw Camilla as a competitor force that threatened to reshape the monarchy to fit her own vision, not just as a stepmother. Delaying the confrontation was no longer an option. A private conference was set up in a chamber with oak paneling deep within Buckingham Palace. It was a purposeful setting. This was a family-only reckoning, rather than a show for the camera. With Anne and William at his sides, symbolizing both history and the future in equal measure, Charles sat at the head, clearly conflicted. With the same poise that had seen her through decades of mockery, Camilla walked in with her chin up and her eyes unwavering. This time, however, there was no audience to applaud her fortitude, and no pitying look from her spouse to protect her. If not official, the charges were unambiguous. With the composed authority of a woman who had dedicated her life to the crown, Anne spoke them. Silent at first, but with a steady gaze, William added the weight of the next generation's judgment. Charles then started talking, his voice quiver with sadness, rather than fury. He detailed her complaints, personal affairs, intrusion into politics, hints of ambition outside of her position, and most importantly, the Remil revelation that had called into question her devotion. Camilla lost her temper. Witnesses later described how her hand gripped the edge of the table as her lips compressed. "You can't mean this," she muttered, her tone a mixture of desperation and incredulity. Clinging to the conviction of Charles's loyalty, she had endured scandal, tabloids, and public humiliation for decades. It was impossible to fathom him faltering now, in front of his sister and son. Charles, nevertheless, persisted. Despite his trembling, his statements were uncompromising. He reminded her that trust was the only thing that kept the monarchy afloat, and that trust had been betrayed. The man who had supported her in the face of the world must have felt betrayed to Camilla. The others in the room saw it as the reclaiming of the monarchy's board. The altercation ended in silence rather than yelling. There was a hush that seemed to reverberate more loudly than any charge. In that silence, Camilla's crown's future, which had once seemed invincible to her, was in jeopardy. However, what transpired in that room would not only determine her destiny, but also permanently change the course of the kingdom. Everything would change with what came next. A silent verdict. The gathering was held in a different chamber from the council room, where decisions were made, or the big ballroom, where kings had celebrated victories. Rather, a smaller, oak-paneled hall that was chosen for its seclusion was nestled away from the echoes of history, deep within Buckingham Palace. Portraits of former monarchs lined the walls, their painted eyes gazing on, as if they had witnessed a moment that would shape the future of the monarchy. Camilla walked determinedly into the room as usual. Her placid demeanor, developed over decades of enduring mockery, was cultivated with her shoulders squared, and her chin up. That poise had served as her defense against rumors and tabloids for years. Today, however, there were no cameras to influence, and no people to persuade. Her eyes did not soften, and the only people seated in front of her were family. Charles was clearly tired when he sat at the head of the table, as he shuffled papers he hardly needed, documents detailing rumors that had solidified into evidence. His hands shook a little. Her fixation on Remil as a rival seat of power, private dinners, phone conversations with political leaders, and the artifact that represented a crown she would never have earned. They had weathered storms together because of his love for Camilla. However, the weight of monarchy now put that very love to the test. It was Anne who spoke first. Her voice was clipped and quiet, yet it was sharp enough to cut through the tension. "The people are the reason the monarchy exists," she stated firmly. "Ambition cannot be served by it." The comments were delivered with the authority of a woman who has dedicated her entire life to duty, not with cruelty. William said nothing, his face more damning than his words. His mother's legacy was in his steely, unwavering eye. That stillness must have sounded louder than any allegation to Camilla. Finally, Charles started. At first his voice trembled, like a man who had been split in two. He talked about her loyalty, how she had supported him during his exile in the court of public opinion, and how she had faced mockery. He acknowledged that he had survived decades of being overshadowed by Diana's memories, because of her tenacity. His tone tightened after a brief moment, when it appeared as though his remarks would become a defense, another gesture of dedication. He enumerated the complaints, her increasing power, her meddling in affairs, reserved for the sovereign, her advocacy for her children's status in royal circles, and lastly, the finding at Remil, a sign too poisonous to ignore. "The crown is not mine to give," he said, raising his eyes to finally meet hers. "It is not for you to mold. The people own it, and their confidence has been betrayed." It was a thunderclap of words. The aides standing along the walls all gasped. Hearing the verdict announced out loud, appeared to shock even those who had anticipated it. Camilla lost her temper. Later witnesses remembered her hand grasping the table so firmly that her knuckles became white, and her lips quivering. After everything I've given," she said in a broken voice. Charles, however, refused to give in. His eyes gleamed with tears, yet his will was unwavering. He went on to say that day would be the last for the title of Queen Consort. With only 2 words, decades of devotion and collective defiance against the outside world came to an end. The time has come. They bore the burden of centuries of custom, of all the kings who had put duty ahead of their own interests. William remained silent, but it was sufficient. His unblinking, icy gaze gave the impression that Diana herself was speaking via her son's face. It was the last straw for Camilla. Her eyes were wide with amazement, and her face was pallid as she staggered back. She had feared and believed impossible, that the man who had defended her against a whole country would now deprive her of the very crown she had battled for.
There was a profound silence in the chamber, the silence that comes after thunder. The decision had been made. Duty had triumphed over love, or maybe the crown had sacrificed one of its own, as some would subsequently claim. The country responds. Charles had hardly finished speaking, when the quiet inside Buckingham Palace started to break. Scrawled notes, courtiers muttered in concern, and soon the inevitable happened. Those oak-paneled walls did not hear the decision. What started out as a private reckoning turned into a public controversy. The nation's streets were filled with sorrow, rage and incredulity as the news spread across headlines. Queen consort no more. Crowds rapidly gathered outside the palace gates, as if history itself required witness. Some carried candles, their flames flickering in the twilight like a memorial to a deceased person. Pictures of Diana were thrown into the air, as if she had triumphed from the afterlife. Her remembrance was evoked once more. Others held signs supporting Camilla, charging the monarchy of treachery and compromising allegiance for survival. It was a somber and aggressive environment. It is both a battleground and a vigil. The reaction was just as fierce on social media. Within minutes, hashtags like Queen and Justice for Diana were no longer popular. Captions that now resembled epitaphs were uploaded with photos of Camilla standing next to Charles at her crowning. Messages of sorrow were intermingled with scorn, however. Pity for a woman who had been mocked for decades, and then thrown out when she thought she was safe at last. For Queen Camilla, the news was painful in every way. In front of millions, her victory was recast as sorrow. However, was the monarchy revealing its weakness, or defending itself? That was the question that kept coming up in newspaper columns, talk shows and conversations in cafes. Charles's action was viewed by some as decisive evidence that the monarch could make amends and protect the institution over individual interest. He was portrayed by others as weak, a monarch who had betrayed the same woman who had supported him through scandal and disdain. It was a disturbing sight to monarchists. What assurance did any royal title provide, if a queen consort might be removed so quickly? Was loyalty in the crown conditional, to disappear as soon as the numbers went south? Republicans, on the other hand, saw it as evidence of the monarchy's instability, a family drama that permeated national life, and revealed the institution's reliance on appearance, rather than content. William and Catherine, meantime, were inadvertently declared the silent winners. The masses were soothed by their presence, and their popularity served as a buffer against the unrest. Days after the announcement, videos of Catherine visiting a children's hospice went viral. Her calmness and friendliness stood in stark contrast to Camilla's loneliness. According to polls conducted that same week, Camilla's approval fell into the single digits, while Catherine's rose to all-time highs. For Camilla, losing her title and being removed from official portraits and stationery was the ultimate heartbreak. Once a queen, she was now discarded and a lone figure in the public consciousness. She was viewed by her supporters as a betrayed woman. She was at last paying the price for decades of controversy, according to her detractors. However, the fact was the same in both versions. The country was split, and the uproar of response exposed the weakness of the monarchy in addition to Camilla's downfall. The crown, however, had made it through. How much does it cost? You will want to know the extent of this storm spread. The decision had been made, the crown was silently removed. Buckingham Palace acted quickly to end her rule in the days that followed. The cipher she used disappeared from official records. Gilded walls were silently cleared of portraits that had just been hung, as if history itself had been altered overnight. Even the royal website was changed. The woman who was once at the very core of the kingdom was now relegated to the periphery and was only a shadow in the hallways she used to occupy. The most eerie moment, however, was captured in a photograph seen by those gathered outside Clarence House, rather than in the media or on television. Many would consider Camilla's walk to be her last. There was no formal vehicle, no entourage and no crown. Clad in subdued hues, her face impassive, she strolled leisurely along the gravel pathway of the house that had been her and Charles's shared domicile, the massive doors shut behind her. With the solemnity of dismissal, not with fanfare, silence descended on the street's crowds. While some watched with cold delight, others with sympathy. It was the first time a woman who had struggled for decades to win the prize had been denied it. It was a heartbreaking sight for her supporters. Sad news for Queen Camilla, who sacrificed so much to support Charles, only to be left behind when duty called for it. The moment felt like justice to her critics. Finally, Diana's ghost settles scores in the most conspicuous manner possible. It was impossible to overlook the meaning of that lonely trek. After being crowned as consort, and subsequently ridiculed as an intruder, Camilla now walked as a woman undone, rather than a queen. Nevertheless, her story was not yet complete, according to those who knew her the best. Yes, she was heartbroken, but she was also silently determined. Was she getting ready to withdraw into herself, quietly coping with her loss? Or was she already thinking of taking a different route, one of covert retaliation, fueled by letters and secrets that only she could divulge? Her fall had spared the kingdom, but it had exposed its weakness. What else could break under strain if a queen consort could be eliminated so quickly? The public was left divided between distrust and sympathy. It's unclear if Camilla's withdrawal signaling the end of the palace's lengthy scandalous history, or the start of a new one. There were more questions than answers after her last walk. Was her reign really coming to an end, the final page of a tale characterized by heartache and controversy? Or was she the only one with the ability to unleash the storm that was about to happen? Although Camilla's crown has vanished into the past, her legacy endures. Was this the last chapter of her life, or was it the worst harm to the monarch? Don't forget to subscribe for more royal secrets, and leave your comments below.